Roig. I'm an author and a political scientist. I live in Germany and I initially come from France. Oh yes, of course. So my mother is from the West Indies. My father is Jewish Algerian, so he's half Sephardi and half Ashkenazi. I was raised in a secular household, but a very much Zionist household. And being Jewish but not white is definitely something that has been questioned here in Germany. I've heard from white Germans who are not even Jewish that I'm not Jewish. And so one could explain this by the fact that my father is Jewish and that I'm a patrilineal Jew, but there are many public figures in Germany who are Jewish and whose fathers are Jewish, and their Jewishness is not really questioned because of their whiteness. So Ashkenativity is basically the fact that Ashkenazi culture, Ashkenazi identity is subsuming the rest of, or at least the wide diversity of the Jewish experience, of the Jewish culture, of Jewish backgrounds. And so it means that we associate Jewishness primarily with Ashkenazi identity. And it's not just something that happened naturally, but it has been a strategy of whitening Jewishness as well. And it's the workings of white supremacy within Jewish society, but also within the Jewish community. And so we can explain that through different policies, but also through the fact that most spheres of power in Israeli society have been dominated by Ashkenazi people. And the fact that other identities have been also constructed as inferior in relation with Palestinians and Muslims and Arabs. So it means that the identity of Arab Muslims, or for example, let's say Yemeni Muslims, Yemeni Jews, Iraqi Jews, also Sephardi Jews from North Africa, or Felasha Jews from Ethiopia, have been constructed as inferior and not really belonging to society. But at the same time, there was a pressure to create a demographic superiority. And so to create a demographic superiority, and in that sense, there has been an assimilation and the centering of the Jewish identity, irrespective of the different backgrounds that we see within Israeli society, a long-standing racism and discriminatory practices towards non-Ashkenazi Jews. An example would be the sterilization campaigns that happened around 1993 on Felasha women, on Jewish Ethiopian women, to reduce the birth of Felasha children, so Black Jewish children in Israel. So this is just but one example. There have been many examples. So it's not only based on this that I would say that Zionism is inherently anti-Semitic, but I would say that Zionism has many or uses many anti-Semitic tropes. And it's not necessarily by design, but it happened because Zionism was all about rehabilitating Jewishness. It was all about assimilating Jewishness to whiteness. And in doing so, some of the anti-Semitic tropes have been mobilized. And an example would be, the best example would be creating a new, like a racial re-engineering within Zionism, meaning creating a new race of Jews that are fit for statehood, in complete opposite with the stereotypical feminized, intellectual, cosmopolitan Jew, diasporic Jew, creating an image or a new race of Jews who are muscular, who are militarized, who are anchored in a nation state, an ethno-nationalist state. And so this is in essence as well an appropriation or using an anti-Semitic trope for that matter. The other anti-Semitic trope is the creation of the Jewish of the diaspora Jews, or the pathologization of the diaspora Jew, and creating or isolating Jewish identity, isolating Jewishness, isolating Jews from the rest of the world, and building on the myth that Jewish people are unassimilable, that Jewish people are not able to assimilate to existing societies. And so this idea that we need the state of Israel for Jews because they cannot exist within the rest of the world. So it's this isolation of Jews is an anti-Semitic trope. there's also the idea that, or at least the fact that anti-Semitism and Zionism have worked in concert. The Hasbara agreements that were made between Ben-Gurion and Hitler and their respective organizations, which was about sending Jews to Israel, but it was also an economic contract of wealth transfer. So it was not really about saving all the Jews from Nazism and saving all the Jews from the Holocaust. It was more about, partially, of course, it was that, but it was very much attached to wealth. So a lot of poor Jews within those agreements were not covered and were not able to relocate to mandatory Palestine at the time. And we see today as well that a lot of highly anti-Semitic fascist figures have been endorsing Zionism and recognize Zionism as an ideology that is very close to them. And it's not minimizing or an annulment of their anti-Semitism. On the contrary, it's a confirmation by wanting Israel as a state where Jews will be driven out of Europe, where Jews will be relocated to a faraway country that has nothing to do with Europe, where European societies were never called to work on their anti-Semitism and to create a climate where Jewish people can be safe, is deeply anti-Semitic. So, for example, Marine Le Pen, the head of the French Rassemblement National, who is a fascist, anti-Semitic, deeply racist party, has said, I've always been a Zionist. We say that as well with the AfD, figures like Gallon, for example, who said that Israel needs to be a rampart to the rest of the world. Israel represents white civilization. It represents Judeo-Christian culture, which also is a highly problematic coupling of Judeo-Christianism. It's something that is completely ahistoric, something that has emerged after the Holocaust to really create, or at least institutionalize in discourse and rhetoric, the whitening and the assimilation of Jews to whiteness and of Jewish culture in opposition, again, to Muslims, to Arabs, to the whole of the Middle East, right? Or we can take Biden, who said, if we didn't have an Israel, then we would need to create an Israel for our interests in the region. So we clearly see here that that Zionism serves the interest of anti-Semitic agendas, that Zionism recuperates anti-Semitic tropes, and that I wouldn't say that Zionism as a project has been inherently anti-Semitic, but it has been inherently colonial. It has been inherently embedded in a colonial discourse of the barbaric, undeveloped others and the superior European colonizers. That's for sure. Yes, absolutely. So I think it's very important here to, just like we say, men are victims of the patriarchy, it's very important to deeply emphasize that women and non-binary people and people of the LGBT community are the primary victims of the patriarchy. And just in the same way, Muslims, and here in this, Muslims in the region and Arabic people, Palestinians, are the primary victims of Zionism. They are the primary victims of Zionism. They are the ones who have suffered from generations under the hands of a militarized, deeply racist, fascist regime, right? Which is the Zionist regime, which is the Israeli state as a whole. And I think it's important here to not single out different governments, because since the creation of Israel, there hasn't been a year or a single government which hasn't displaced, discriminated, oppressed, ethnically cleansed the Palestinian people. That being said, Zionism is very detrimental to Jewish people worldwide, because it conflates Judaism and Jewish identity with the state of Israel. And if you have a state that is committing gross human rights violations, crimes against humanity, genocide, displacement, that is using anti-Muslim propaganda, that is a very strategic geopolitical arm of the United States and representing the interest of white European and North American imperialism. And we say this state equals Jews. Then of course it's going to create an increase of anti-Semitism due to this conflation and to the actions of the state of Israel. So it means that nowadays, when you're a Jewish person, it becomes almost necessary to distantiate yourself from the state of Israel very clearly and very unequivocally by saying, okay, I do not support the actions of the state of Israel. And this is the case because there has been this conflation. The isolation of Jewish people is also one of the consequences of the negative consequences of Zionism by creating the myth that Jewish people can only be safe in the state of Israel, in occupied Palestine. And this myth is a myth because it's not true. I think Israel is one of the most dangerous places for Jewish people worldwide. And it negates the diasporic aspect of Judaism and of the Jewish identity, irrespective of religion, because Judaism and the Jewish community, the Jewish history is a diasporic history, right? So it means that Jewish people, the motto, wherever we live, that's our homeland. So it was also the slogan on the Bundesposter in 1918. And a Bund leader called Ehrlich also mentioned the fact that wherever we live, it's our homeland, and we need to respect this diasporic aspect. And also one more thing, like, what is Zionism? Zionism is a political, economic project of settler colonialism and the creation of an ethno-nationalist state centered on the interests and the supremacy of Jewish people. This is factually what it is. It's not an opinion. This is really the description of what Israel is. And anybody would say, no, it's not a colonial land. Like, check the facts first. So this is what Zionism is. And it's a 19th century ideology and political project. What is Judaism? Judaism is a 4,000-year-old religion with a very rich cultural fabric, with very rich and diverse roots, with a diversity of opinions, a diversity of currents, political currents, cultural currents within this group. So equating both of them does enormous disservice to Judaism. It's extremely reductive. It's suffocating for Judaism, right? So it means that Judaism is so much more expansive than Zionism is. And another aspect of anti-Semitism, another anti-Semitic trope that is being represented and also activated by Zionism is erasing the political diversity of Judaism and the fact that Jewish people can be anti-Zionist and still be Jewish, right? That Zionism is not constitutive of Jewish identity. You can be, and there are many very well-known anti-Zionist Jews, including Hannah Arendt, or you spoke about Avi Shlaim, Noam Filkenstein, Naomi Klein, Judith Butler, you name them, there are many of them, right? Even Freud at some point was against Zionism. Einstein, even though he changed his mind several times, but he recognized, like many people, we have a very long list of Jewish people who have been anti-Zionist, who have criticized the state of Israel. And it's the recognition that the founding of the state of Israel, the implementation of the Zionist project, has been problematic and violent in many ways. Yes, so that's the Ehrlich quote that I was mentioning. So the Bund leader in 1918. And basically that was a very prophetic text. And that's why I like to quote it and mention it, simply because it gives us a bit of perspective about how it was possible at the when Zionism was created to understand the effect that it would have. And because if a state is created under the premise that Jewish people are not safe anywhere else, and that anti-Semitism is on the rise, and that anti-Semitism and hatred against Jewish people is the basis, the fundament that legitimizes the creation of a state that is based on settler colonialism, then it's going to be in the interest of that state to basically have anti-Semitism happen everywhere in the world. So some people have said that it's close to like a conspiration to mention this, but that was as well in the text, right? Saying that the foundation of Israel is based on this, and that if Jews everywhere in the world feel safe, there will be no need for the state of Israel. If Jewish people everywhere in the world feel welcomed and do not experience any discrimination, then the state of Israel doesn't need to exist, right? And at the same time, that's true that anti-Semitism exists, right? That's true that people have been, especially in the mid-20th century, discrimination and persecution of Jewish people was fatal. It culminated in the Holocaust with the death and the murder of 6 million people by here, the very Germans today, who very much insist on protecting the state of Israel, and by that protecting a highly fascist, genocidal regime, right? And so that's why it's important to recognize that anti-Semitism in the foundation of Israel and in the maintenance of the state of Israel fulfills a very important function. It's here again, that's a fact. It's not an opinion. It's factually so, because the foundational principles of Israel rest on the idea of, or rest on the persecution of Jews. And so that's why what we see, and I think it's important to underline it, the fact that the individual hatred toward Jews has been greatly emphasized here in Germany in headlines, that there has been a great disproportion between reporting on hatred and discrimination of Palestinians and Muslim people, state repression, on the silencing of Palestinian voices, and on the other hand, fears around the Jewish safety or the safety of Jewish people in Germany. So this discrepancy between both reporting is also rooted in Zionism and the idea that the discourse on anti-Semitism and the visibility of anti-Semitism is vital for the state of Israel. So yeah, we see that, of course, the silencing of criticism against Israel could not be efficient for so long. So now 2 years later, 2 years into the genocide, we see that people have failed at silencing those voices consistently. So the silencing in the beginning has worked. It has been efficient at creating a climate where people felt scared of voicing their concerns, of expressing their solidarity towards Palestinian people. So of course this is true. And at the same time, now that criticism is becoming mainstream and that the accusations of anti-Semitism are no longer effective, we see a tendency to single out Netanyahu as the main figure and kind of overlooking the rest of Israeli society, which stands firmly behind him. We have to say that we're in a situation where the bulk of Israeli society is supporting the genocide. And there are statistics for this. Again, like these are facts. So we see that it's important to look at what system created the vast appeal of a person like Netanyahu, and how Israeli society has culminated into this genocide. And it didn't happen out of a vacuum. So that's why it's important to see that the propaganda within Israeli society and across borders, like again, I said, I was born in a family that harbored Zionist rhetorics of, Jewish people are and in an enclave around mean Arabs and Muslims who want to kill them. And so that's why we need the state of Israel to keep us safe. And it's all about self-defense and everything. So this is really I grew up with this kind of rhetoric. So, and you can imagine, I was living in France from a non-religious background, and you can imagine how it is when you live in Israeli society and how effective this propaganda has been. And so I think it's important now to not personify this issue and to not think, oh, Netanyahu was just being crazy and he had ideas of his own and he decided single-handedly to commit this genocide. No, we have to do with an ideology that culminated into this genocide, which, again, this genocide is a long, slow ethnic cleansing over decades and decades of occupation and colonization, right? And so that's why in that sense, it's important to raise awareness on the Zionist project and how it is impossible to implement the Zionist project without displacement, without ethnic cleansing, without land seizures, because this is what it was about. In early conferences of the 19th century, long before the Holocaust, but at a time where anti-Semitism was, in fact, very worrisome in Europe, you had headlines in the New York Times saying, "We will colonize Palestine." So I'm not inventing it, right? So it was really a project of settler colonialism. And there was very much as well the idea at the time that, or at least the colonialist language, the colonial language was happily used because at the time it was quite popular. In Europe, it was the time where colonial powers were having a lot of influence worldwide. So colonialism didn't have bad press. And it's only in the 50s, 60s, 70s, in the big wave of decolonization, of administrative decolonization that Zionists stopped using the colonial language to describe their activities, right? And distantiated themselves from that because it was seen negatively, right? And here we can come back to the quote by Ehrlich in 1918, when he clearly said that Zionism ultimately will lead to fascism, will lead to exclusions, because you cannot maintain a state based on ethno-nationalist Jewish superiority without using force, without using displacement, without using oppression and discrimination. And so that's why what we need to tackle is the Zionist ideology that creates this divide between the superior European assimilated Jews and the inferior backwards Arabs, Muslims, who are the Palestinians, right, who are terrorists, and between the terrorists and democracy, between enlightenment and obscurantism, between, pinkwashing and, democratic values and being open to gays and lesbians, and then on the other hand, homophobes. So all these tropes are created by a discourse on Zionism that thrives on this divide, that thrives on this hierarchy. And so if we get rid of Netanyahu, it will be good, because we need to get rid of a person that has shown tremendous violence, right? So it's important, but at the same time, the problem will not be solved when Netanyahu leaves the government. He will be replaced by other leaders, even if they're not as fascist as he is, but the problem in its core will not disappear. Colonialism/racism, the patriarchy and colonialism are a triangle that's impossible to separate them from each other because they feed each other. Capitalism thrives on hierarchies. Capitalism thrives on the creation of humans that are inferior, on labor force that is inferior, that is cheap, that is sometimes unpaid. If we look at the care labor done by billions of women on earth. And at the same time, like in every single issue, it's important to really look at the three as an intertwined system instead of systems operating in silos. So I remember recently I was at an event, a feminist event, and a person said, yes, you keep speaking about capitalism, but I want to speak about feminism because I think you can be a capitalist and be feminist. And I said, yes, it's possible, but this is not the kind of feminism that will lead to liberation. This is the kind of feminism that will lead to more patriarchal power for some women, and that ultimately will strengthen patriarchal power. And so the idea that, if you fight racism without looking at the patriarchy or at capitalism, it stays on a very performative level. And when it's highly superficial, when it's all about rhetoric and like using the right words and not offending people, or having representation of minorities to be seen in institutions that are highly problematic, if you're fighting capitalism without fighting the patriarchy and racism, then you miss entirely the point, because the bulk of the oppressed labor force is 80% female and over 90% from the global south. So that's why it's important to really look at those fights as intertwined, because only then can we go to the roots of the issue, and can we advance true transformation, deep transformation, instead of just changes that are aesthetic or that are just on the level of performance. And so that's why I insist on this, because intersectionality is not just a nice discourse, an analytical lens that we can use, in academic circles, but it's a political project of radically changing the world, right? It's a political project that really invites us to create a new paradigm that is not centered on capital, on exploitation, and on extraction, but rather create a paradigm, or at least move into a paradigm that is centered on life and life itself, right? Because currently we judge lives according to where they are located on this hierarchy, depending on whether you're white or black or Muslim, or whether you're straight or trans or cis, or, whether you're disabled or not disabled. So all these lines of differentiation, all these hierarchies are structuring the access to power, access to resources, access to empathy, and ultimately whether those lives matter or not, right? And I want to extend it as well to the non-human world, right? Because the line of the human is what defines humanity, and the line of the human is what defines whether one is worthy of the title of life and whether this life is worthy or not. And so that's why, like, if we have an intersectional lens to it, we can understand that the line of the human and all these hierarchies is the problem, and that we need to enter a paradigm where life itself is revered, is recognized, is respected, and that it's not really about or whom this life is inhabited, whether it's an insect or a white man or a black woman or a tree. And I think that's really like, we need to go through an ontological shift that will bring us further, instead of just looking at the system and making some tweaks here and there that are not going to change anything of the matter. So it's been a big crisis for me to live in Germany those past 2 years. I have really very seriously thought of leaving the country because I found it impossible to stay here and feel safe. I've been the target of defamation campaigns. I've lost a lot in alignment. So it's not really a loss, but it's more, I see it more as alignment to my values, and it as a very good filter, like knowing people for who they are and knowing who I can really count on and make alliances with. But at the same time, it was quite painful to live in that climate, and also to see the repression of the Muslim community, the blatant anti-Muslim racism in Germany that is not even seen as such, the denial around it, the demonization of Muslims. So and also the decomplexified racism taking place here. And so I think when you say that people look away, it's not only a privilege, but it's an expression of power. So privilege and power, and at the same time, it's consent, right? So you express your consent by doing nothing, by saying nothing, by pretending it doesn't exist. You express consent for it to happen. And this is what is highly worrisome, because if you see this consent, the widespread collective consent across German society, it means that this could happen to many people here and that nobody would protect us. What was deeply troubling in the past 2 years is that I had believed in the existence of a leftist solidarity and a leftist continuum and a leftist politics. And all of this was completely destroyed after October 7th, where I realized that there is no real left in Germany. There is no real solidarity taking place. You have a lot of people who are left-leaning or really like identifying as leftists or even anti-fascists, who are deeply fascist, who are supporting a deeply fascist regime currently committing a genocide. And then it's really creating worries about the future of non-white generations here in Germany. And so that's why like this consent, like the collective consent for violence and for racist violence, is very unsettling. And I don't know if there's a solution. I don't know if German society, I don't know if it's not too late, and if German society should have done this work much earlier. If German society should have confronted their racism much earlier, because I feel like it's just coming up now from all sides, and that there's no single side in German society currently where I can very confidently say they will be here for us. They will protect us against fascism. They will protect us against racist violence. I really doubt that there is such a group currently, and it's extremely sad, not only for us, but also for Germans. So that's a very big pillar of German society, that obedience and rules are sacrosanct almost, that they're like if it's a natural law, like from the moment that something is declared a law, you lose all the possibility to question it, to challenge it, to bypass it. No, when a law is a law, it needs to be respected, and it can come to the level of God-given law. And this is highly, highly dangerous, because we can see that the legal systems adapt to political systems, right? And we see that things can be criminalized. Like today, for example, it's the fact of saving people from drowning in the Mediterranean Sea is illegal. It's criminalized. Is it just? No, it's not just, but it's criminalized. And so from the moment, and this is not questioned. So a lot of people in German society would say, yes, but that's it. You can welcome all the misery of the world, so this law actually makes sense. And so it means that there's actually no moral compass for rejecting certain laws and disobeying to these laws. And disobedience, collective disobedience, is the only weapon, like moral and collective weapon that we have, right? That a weapon normally kills lives, but this weapon could actually save lives. And so disobedience is something that doesn't really work well in Germany because people are like hypnotized or possessed by the legal apparatus that tells them right and wrong, and not even being able to really discern what is just, what is morally right. And this is what I'm scared of, because the Nazis could thrive and the Holocaust could be completed, not because everybody was fiercely Nazi. Of course, there were a lot of fierce Nazis in Germany, and don't tell me that your grandparents were resistance, because no. But the silent majority who looked away, who obeyed, who abide by the laws quietly, they were the most dangerous Nazis. And it's not me saying this. There's a quote saying this. I can't remember who said it, but the worst Nazis were not the ones in the Wehrmacht, but they were, the nice people, nice neighbors who didn't want to talk about politics and who let it happen, right? And so that's what I'm very scared of. And I compare it to other societies. I compare it to France, okay? I come from France, and France is also, like, the political situation is dire and very worrisome as well. France is a deeply racist society, deeply colonial society too. But I think I feel, the worry that I feel here is, has another quality because of this complete obedience and the sacrosanct respect for laws and for rules, irrespective of whether they're right or wrong. We rely the Hollywoodian explanation, or at least Erzählung, so the narrative of heroes saving the world. So they're lone-standing, extraordinary personalities who are going to save us all, and the rest of us are passive. And generally, we see as well a fight between these heroic figures and like a form of state power, right? I think, for example, of Spider-Man, where the police is going after him at some point. I don't know if I'm right, but I think I see this image. And at the same time, what we lose with these kind of narratives, and they're very deeply ingrained in our understanding as well of catastrophes and evil and good, that we lose touch with our own power. We lose touch with the own power that we hold as a collective, but also individually, right? And so in this book, what I tried to convey was the idea that caring, and caring is a bit abstract as a word, but when we care, we grieve, we are angry, we have rage, and we're motivated by justice. We're motivated by establishing, or correcting a situation, right? So caring means action. Caring is not a passive word, right? When you care, you're generally not passive. Not caring is passive. And so that's what I tried to convey, namely that the collective care that we have for a situation, for justice, for love, for life is our superpower, our collective superpower. Because when one person cares, it's good, but if all of us care, we can move mountains. I wish for us, and that's my hope, that we awaken to this power and that we realize that, our emotions and emotions that are constructed as negative, like rage and anger and grief and sadness, we can transmute them. We can transmute them into action collectively. And so that's why the establishment of communities and of networks of care, of relationships in real life is so important. It is so essential to this fight and to this, I would call it the revolution or the paradigmatic shift that we're experiencing, or resistance. It has so many different names, but it's not staying silent and caring. Like, really, we need to dare to care, because caring is what makes us human, right? When we don't feel, we lose part of our humanity, right? Because what makes us deeply human is feeling. Our emotions is what makes us human, and this is why the human experience is also so difficult. But it's a power, and we need to yield it. So there are solutions for sure, but it's not my place as a Jewish person not living in Palestine to give out the solution. I think there are enough solutions within the Palestinian people, and it's time to center their voices, center their interest. This is what the right to self-determination is, and it hasn't been applied for 77 years. I think it's time to listen to Palestinians. They have a lot to say, and we should listen. Just like let Palestinians decide it's their right to self-determination. And like this whole idea of, yeah, but there will be Islamists coming to power. It's like, this is colonial bullshit. This is super racist, what you're just saying. Like, do you think our system is better? Yeah, maybe a message to all the people who have been undecisive so far and who, while listening to me, are uncomfortable and thinking, wait, but is she anti-Semitic? Is it problematic? I really invite you to look at the situation with fresh eyes and to look at the situation without all the noise that you've heard and all the background that has indoctrinated you in believing that, that Muslims and Arabs are threatening, that they are violent, that they don't need protection, that they don't need empathy. I really invite you to question those narratives and to connect with your inner compass of justice and understand that supporting the Palestinian cause and supporting the end of genocides, whether they are in Myanmar, in Sudan, in Congo, in Palestine, is the right thing to do. Yeah.